He was paid $40 to steal a woman from her people. By dawn, she would hold his life in her hands, and he would beg her to take it. Before we ride into this tale, subscribe for more stories of the Old West, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from as the stars come out tonight. The money lay on the table between them like an accusation. Jacob Mercer stared at the four $10 gold pieces, their faces catching the lamplight in the back room of the Red Creek Saloon. His calloused fingers rested inches from the coins, but he hadn't touched them yet. Touching them would make it real. $40, said Thomas Wardell, and his voice carried the certainty of a man who'd never gone hungry. Half now, half when you bring her to the ranch. Jacob's jaw tightened. He was 32 years old, and the last 3 years had worn him down to something he barely recognized in a mirror. His ranch, what was left of it, sat dying 15 miles east of Red Creek. The grass burned brown by drought. The cattle sold off one by one just to keep the bank from taking the land his father had died defending. "You want me to kidnap a woman," Jacob said quietly. Wardell leaned back in his chair, his suit clean and pressed, his hands soft. He owned half of Red Creek and wanted the other half. Men like Wardell always wanted more. "I want you to retrieve someone who has information I need," Wardell corrected. "Information about cattle thefts that have cost me thousands. The Comanche girl knows where my stock is being held. She's been seen near every site where my herds disappeared." "Girl," Jacob repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. "Woman, then." Wardell's smile was thin. "Ayesha, the tribe calls her that. Means little one, I'm told, though there's nothing little about the trouble she's caused me. Bring her to my North Ranch 3 days from now. I'll handle the questioning from there." Jacob had known Thomas Wardell for 5 years, long enough to know that questioning could mean many things, none of them gentle, but $40. God help him, $40 would pay 3 months on the banknote. It would buy seed for spring planting. It would mean another season of hope instead of watching the only thing he had left slip through his fingers like water. "How do you know she's the one?" Jacob asked. Wardell pushed a piece of paper across the table. A crude drawing showed a young woman's face, delicate features, dark eyes that seemed to stare straight through the sketch and into something beyond. Written below were the words, "Seen at Running Creek, Devil's Canyon, and North Ridge. Tracks lead to Comanche camp at Blue Mesa. My men have tracked her movements. She's there, at Blue Mesa, with the small band that camps near the river fork. 30 people, maybe less. They're peaceful, treaty-abiding. You won't have trouble, except for stealing one of their own." Wardell's eyes hardened. "She's seen with white men, Mercer, horse traders, drifters. She moves between worlds. You take her quiet, before dawn, when she goes to fetch water. 1 hour's ride, and she's out of earshot before anyone knows she's gone. Simple work for a man who needs $40 as bad as you do." The words struck true because they were true. Jacob had eaten nothing but beans and hard bread for 2 weeks. His horse was thin. His boots had holes he'd stuffed with newspaper. Pride was a luxury for men who could afford it. He reached out and took the gold pieces. They were heavy in his palm, heavier than they should have been. 3 days, Wardell said, standing. "North Ranch. Don't make me come looking for you, Mercer." When Wardell left, Jacob sat alone in the lamplight, staring at the drawing of the woman. Ayesha, the little one. Her eyes seemed sad even in the rough sketch. He wondered if the artist had seen that sadness or if Jacob was only imagining it, projecting his own shame onto paper and ink. He folded the drawing and tucked it into his shirt pocket, next to his heart, where it felt like a stone. The ride to Blue Mesa took most of the night. Jacob traveled by moonlight, keeping to the low country where the land rolled in gentle swells and the sage grew thick enough to hide a man on horseback. His horse, a bay gelding named Dancer, picked his way carefully through the darkness. The animal had been his father's once, the last good thing Jacob had left from a better time. The September air was cool, carrying the first hints of autumn. Overhead, the stars spread across the sky in a river of light so bright Jacob could see his shadow on the ground. It was the kind of night that made a man feel small, made him think about God and judgment and the things he'd done that couldn't be undone. He'd killed 2 men in his life, both in self-defense, both justified by any law of the frontier. But justified didn't mean forgotten. He could still see their faces when he closed his eyes, still hear the sound a body makes when it falls and doesn't get back up. This was different, he told himself. No one had to die. It was just information, just questions. He'd take the woman to Wardell's ranch. She'd tell what she knew, and then... What? Would Wardell let her go? Would he hurt her? Jacob pushed the thoughts away. $40, 3 months of hope. He couldn't afford to think beyond that. By the time he reached the bluffs overlooking Blue Mesa, dawn was still 2 hours away. He dismounted and led Dancer into a stand of cottonwoods, tying the horse where he could graze on the thin grass growing near a dried-up creek bed. Then Jacob climbed on foot to the ridge and looked down at the camp. 30 people, Wardell had said. It looked even smaller than that. 8 lodges arranged in a loose circle, a few horses grazing nearby, the embers of the central fire glowing faint red in the darkness. Peaceful, quiet, the kind of camp that wanted nothing more than to be left alone in a world that wouldn't allow it. Jacob had fought against the Comanche when he was younger, during the bad years when blood ran hot on both sides and mercy was a word men forgot. He'd seen the aftermath of raids, the burned cabins, the bodies. But he'd also seen what the army did. The villages destroyed, the women and children driven into the winter cold to starve. There were no heroes in those stories, just survivors and ghosts. He settled into the rocks to wait, watching the camp as the night slowly gave way to gray pre-dawn light. He was looking for one woman among many, and he had only this sketch to guide him. The camp began to stir as the darkness thinned. An old woman emerged from one of the lodges, her movements slow with age, and began coaxing the fire back to life. Smoke rose in a thin column, straight up in the windless air. A dog barked once, then settled. Children's voices murmured inside one of the lodges, soft and sleepy. Then she appeared. Jacob knew her immediately, though he couldn't have said how. She emerged from the lodge farthest from the fire, wrapped in a blanket against the morning chill. Even from a distance, even in the gray light, there was something about the way she moved, graceful, purposeful, aware of the world around her in a way that spoke of intelligence and caution both. She was younger than he'd expected. 20, perhaps, or near enough. Her hair hung long and dark down her back, and her face, even at this distance, matched the sketch in Jacob's pocket. But the sketch had gotten it wrong. It had captured the features, but not the life, the quiet strength that radiated from her, even in the simple act of walking toward the river. She carried 2 water skins and moved alone, away from the camp, following a worn path down toward the cottonwoods where the river ran shallow over smooth stones. Jacob's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the moment Wardell had described. The woman alone, out of earshot, vulnerable, simple work. He waited until she descended the slope and disappeared into the trees. Then he moved, leaving his hiding place in the rocks and circling around to approach from downstream. Every step felt wrong, like walking toward a cliff edge in the dark. His hand rested on the revolver at his hip, though he had no intention of using it. This wasn't about violence. It was about speed, surprise, and getting her on a horse before she could cry out. He reached the cottonwoods and paused, listening. He could hear the river, the whisper of water over stone. And something else, singing, soft, barely audible in a language he didn't understand. Jacob moved toward the sound, stepping carefully to avoid breaking branches. Through the leaves, he could see her kneeling at the river's edge, filling the water skins. She sang as she worked, a melody that rose and fell like the wind, like something ancient and sad and beautiful all at once. For a moment, just a moment, Jacob hesitated. She looked so peaceful there, so absorbed in her task, so completely unaware of what was coming. It felt like a sin to shatter that peace, like breaking something sacred. Then he thought of his ranch, his father's grave under the oak tree, the banknote that would come due in 3 months. He thought of $40 and what it meant to a man who had nothing left. Jacob stepped out of the trees. She saw him immediately. The singing stopped. Her head turned, and those dark eyes from the sketch met his across 10 feet of riverbank. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply looked at him with an expression that was impossibly calm, as if she'd been expecting this, as if she'd known all along that someone would come. "I don't want to hurt you," Jacob said. The words sounded hollow even to his own ears. She rose slowly, setting the water skins on the ground. When she spoke, her English was clear, barely accented. "Then don't." Her voice was quiet but steady, no fear in it. That unsettled him more than screaming would have. "I need you to come with me," Jacob said. "Just for a few days, answer some questions. Then you can come back." "Whose questions?" She hadn't moved closer, but she hadn't backed away either. She stood balanced, poised, like a deer deciding whether to bolt. "Thomas Wardell. He says you know about cattle thefts. He wants to talk to you." Something flickered in her eyes, not fear, but recognition. "Wardell sent you. He's paying me to bring you in. Peaceful. I give you my word." "Your word." The faintest trace of bitter amusement touched her mouth. "The word of a man who comes at dawn to steal women. That word?" Jacob felt heat rise in his face. "I'm not stealing. I'm asking. With a gun on your hip and no other choice offered. Yes, very different." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "What's your name?" The question surprised him. Jacob Mercer. Jacob Mercer." She repeated it slowly, as if tasting each syllable. "I am Aisha. You have heard of me, or you would not be here. I've heard you might know things about Wardell's cattle. And you believe what Wardell tells you?" "I believe $40, Jacob said, and regretted the honesty immediately. But Aisha only nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. $40. That is what a woman's freedom costs now. Good to know the price. You can fight, Jacob said quietly. You can scream and bring your people running. But that'll end bloody, and I don't want that. Neither do you. Come peaceful, answer the questions, and I'll make sure you get back home safe. You will make sure. Ayesha's eyes held his. You, who are stealing me for $40, will protect me from the man paying you. Do you hear yourself, Jacob Mercer? He did, and he hated what he heard. I'm sorry, he said. I truly am. But I need you to come with me, now. For a long moment, she didn't respond. She stood there at the river's edge, wrapped in her blanket, the water singing over the stones behind her. The eastern sky was lightening, turning from gray to pale gold. Soon the camp would be fully awake. Soon people would notice she was gone. Then Ayesha did something that shocked him. She walked toward him deliberately and stopped 3 feet away. If I come, she said softly, will you promise me one thing? What? Listen. When I speak, listen, not with your ears only. With your heart. Can you do that? Jacob didn't understand what she meant, but he nodded anyway. I'll listen. Then I will come. She bent and retrieved the water skins. But I must bring these back first. My grandmother needs water for her tea. She's old and cannot walk this far anymore. The request was so simple, so human, that Jacob found himself nodding again before he'd thought it through. All right. But quick. Ayesha walked past him, back toward the camp, carrying the water skins. Jacob followed a few paces behind, his hand still resting on his revolver, though he felt increasingly foolish for it. She moved up the slope with steady grace, and when they reached the edge of the camp, she didn't call out or try to run. She simply walked to one of the lodges, ducked inside for a moment, and emerged empty-handed. An old woman's voice called something from within the lodge, and Ayesha responded in Comanche, her tone gentle. Then she turned to Jacob and said, I am ready now. Just like that? Would you prefer I make it harder? There was no mockery in her voice, only genuine curiosity. "I'd prefer you tell me why you're doing this." Aisha glanced back at the camp, at the lodges and the people just beginning their day. When she looked at Jacob again, her eyes held something he couldn't name. Sadness, perhaps. Or resignation. Or something deeper still. "Because fighting you would bring violence to my people. Because I know Thomas Wardell, and I know what he is capable of if crossed. And because," she paused, "because some things must be done, even when we do not wish to do them. You understand this, I think." Jacob understood it all too well. He led her to where Dancer waited in the cottonwoods. The horse raised his head at their approach, ears forward with curiosity. Aisha moved to him without hesitation and laid her hand on his neck, murmuring something soft that made the gelding's ears swivel toward her. "He's beautiful," she said, "strong but gentle. Like his rider wishes to be." The observation cut deep, and Jacob had no response to it. He helped her mount. She needed no help, moving with the easy grace of someone who'd grown up on horseback and then swung up behind her. It was too intimate, her body pressed against his, her hair nearly touching his face. She smelled of sage and smoke and something else, something clean and wild that had no name. 3 days, Jacob said, as much to remind himself as her. "Then you go home." Aisha said nothing. She simply gazed back at the camp as Jacob turned Dancer east, toward Red Creek and Thomas Wardell's North Ranch and whatever waited there. The sun broke over the horizon, spilling gold across the land, and they rode into its light like ghosts fleeing the dawn. They rode in silence for the first hour. Jacob kept Dancer to an easy pace, saving the horse's strength for the long miles ahead. The land around them was empty and vast, rolling prairie broken by occasional stands of mesquite and the dry beds of creeks that wouldn't run again until spring. The sky stretched overhead like an inverted blue bowl, cloudless and infinite. Aisha sat stiff in front of him, her body radiating tension despite her earlier calm. Jacob tried not to notice the way her hair moved in the wind, or the warmth of her back against his chest, or the fact that she smelled better than anything had a right to smell after emerging from a lodge at dawn. He was a man alone with a woman, riding through empty country, and the wrongness of it sat in his stomach like a stone. "Can I ask you something?" Jacob said finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. "You are already asking. Why didn't you run, back at the river? You could have screamed, brought help. Instead you just came." Aisha was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Have you heard the story of the fox and the wolf?" "No. My grandmother told it to me when I was small. A fox was caught by a wolf, and the wolf said, 'I will eat you now.' The fox said, 'If you eat me, you will still be hungry tomorrow. But if you let me go, I will show you where many rabbits hide, and you will be full for a week.' The wolf thought this was clever, so he let the fox go. The fox showed him the rabbit warren. The wolf ate well, and the fox escaped. You're saying you're the fox. I am saying there is more than one way to be free." Aisha turned her head slightly, not quite looking at him. "You think you have captured me, but perhaps I have captured you." The words sent a chill down Jacob's spine, though he couldn't have said why. "That doesn't make sense. Not yet. But it will." She fell silent again, and Jacob didn't press her. He'd given his word to listen, and listening meant more than just hearing words. It meant paying attention to what wasn't said, to the spaces between, to the way her voice carried certainty even when her meaning was unclear. They stopped briefly at midday to water Dancer at a spring Jacob knew, a small pool fed by an underground source that never quite went dry even in drought years. Aisha drank from her cupped hands and then wandered a short distance away, studying the landscape with an intensity that made Jacob nervous. "Don't get any ideas about running," he called. She glanced back at him, and for the first time, he saw something like amusement in her eyes. "Where would I run? We are 2 hours from my people, and you have the horse. I would die of thirst before I walked home. Besides," she knelt and touched something on the ground, "the land knows me here. It would tell you which way I went. Land doesn't talk. No? Ayesha straightened, holding something in her hand. A small gray feather. This is from a sage grouse. It fell this morning when the bird was startled by something passing. The grass here is bent from dancers' hooves. The mud at the spring's edge holds your footprint and mine. The land talks constantly, Jacob Mercer. Most people have simply forgotten how to listen. She tucked the feather into her hair and walked back toward him. Jacob found himself staring, unable to look away. In the full light of day, she was more than pretty. There was an alertness to her, a presence, that made her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with features and everything to do with vitality, with being entirely and completely alive in each moment. You're educated, Jacob said. You're English. Someone taught you. The missionary at the trading post, Mrs. Sarah Collins. She taught any child who would sit still long enough to learn. I sat still. Ayesha's expression softened. She was kind. She died 2 winters ago. I'm sorry. Death comes to everyone. She knew this. She was not afraid. Ayesha looked at him directly. Are you afraid, Jacob Mercer? Of what? Of what happens when we reach Wardell's ranch. Of what he will do to me. Of what you will feel when you see it. The question was too perceptive, too close to the thoughts Jacob had been trying to avoid. Wardell just wants information. Yes. And there are gentle ways to ask for information, and there are other ways. Which way do you think Thomas Wardell prefers? Jacob had no answer to that. He knew Wardell's reputation, knew the stories of men who'd crossed him and ended up broken or disappeared. But acknowledging that meant acknowledging what he himself was participating in, and he wasn't ready to look that truth in the face. We should keep moving, he said instead. Ayesha nodded as if this response told her everything she needed to know. She let him help her mount again, and they rode on into the afternoon heat. They made camp that evening in a box canyon Jacob knew, a place where high walls provided shelter from the wind, and a small overhang offered some protection from the sky. It wasn't much, but it was defensible, and old habit made Jacob think in terms of defense, even when there was no immediate threat. He unsaddled Dancer and rubbed the horse down with dry grass, then set about building a small fire from mesquite branches. Ayesha watched him work, seated on a flat rock with her blanket wrapped around her shoulders. You're kind to your horse, she observed. You care for him before yourself. He's carried me faithfully. He deserves care. Yes, this is good. Ayesha paused. But do you see the irony? Jacob looked up from the fire. What irony? You care for your horse, who serves you willingly. But you do not care for the woman you have stolen, who serves you unwillingly. The difference matters. I'm not hurting you. There are many ways to hurt someone. Chains are not required. She met his gaze steadily. Do you know what it is to be a woman in my position? To be owned, even temporarily, by a man she does not know. To have no say in where she goes, or what happens to her. Jacob felt heat rise in his face again. You're not owned. You're, what? A guest? A companion? Ayesha's voice remained gentle, but her words cut nonetheless. Words are wind, Jacob Mercer. Actions are truth. And the truth is that I am here against my will, subject to your choices, with no power but what you decide to give me. If that is not ownership, what is? I gave you my word I'd keep you safe, and I thank you for that word. But a promise to protect me from others while you yourself have taken my freedom is not kindness. It is merely a softer cage. The fire had caught now, small flames licking at the dry wood. Jacob sat back on his heels, staring into it, feeling the weight of her words pressing on his shoulders like a physical thing. I needed the money, he said quietly. My ranch is failing. The bank will take it if I can't make the payment. It's all I have left of my father, and so you take from me to save what is yours. Ayesha's tone held no judgment, only statement of fact. I understand this. Need makes people do things they would not otherwise do. But understanding a thing does not make it right. Nothing about this is right, Jacob admitted. I know that, but I'm doing it anyway. Yes, You are honest, at least. That is something. She pulled the blanket tighter. Tell me about your father. The shift surprised him. Why? Because I want to know what kind of man raised a son who would steal a woman for $40, yet clearly hates himself for doing it. Jacob almost smiled at that, bitter though the humor was. He was a good man. Better than I am. He came west after the war, the big war, the Civil War, looking for a fresh start. Built the ranch from nothing. Fought drought, Indians, cattle thieves, every damn hardship the frontier could throw at him. Raised me alone after my mother died giving birth. Taught me to ride, to shoot, to work hard and keep my word. He would not approve of this, Ayesha said. It wasn't a question. No, he wouldn't. Jacob poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. He died 3 years ago, thrown from a horse, broke his neck, quick at least. But after he was gone, everything started falling apart. Drought hit, cattle died, markets dropped. I made bad decisions, borrowed money I couldn't pay back. And now here I am, doing things he'd be ashamed of, trying to save something that's probably not worth saving anymore. The land is always worth saving, Ayesha said softly. It endures long after we are gone. Your father knew this. Maybe, but knowing it doesn't make the banknote disappear. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire burn down to coals. The canyon walls held the heat of the day, making the evening comfortable despite the season. Above them, the first stars began to appear, pinpoints of light against the deepening blue. I'm going to make coffee, Jacob said finally. And I have some jerky and hardtack. It's not much, but you're welcome to share it. Thank you. Ayesha rose and came to sit across the fire from him, close enough to share its warmth but maintaining a careful distance. May I ask you something now? I suppose that's fair. When you give me to Wardell and he asks his questions and I give him answers, what do you think happens then? Jacob measured coffee into the battered pot, not meeting her eyes. You go home. That was the deal. That is what you were told. But is it what you believe? He didn't answer because he couldn't lie to her face, and the truth would require him to act on it. Ayesha nodded slowly as if he'd confirmed something. I thought not. You are not a fool, Jacob Mercer, despite what you are doing. You know that men like Thomas Wardell do not spend $40 to ask questions they intend to let someone walk away from answering. Then why did you come with me? Jacob's frustration bled into his voice. If you knew all this, why not fight? I told you. Because some things must be done. She leaned forward slightly, her face illuminated by firelight. What if I told you that I know exactly why Wardell wants me? That I know things about him that could ruin him? That this is not about cattle theft at all? Jacob's hand stilled on the coffee pot. What are you saying? I am saying that you are a piece on a board you do not understand. A good piece, perhaps, moved by a bad player. And the game is not what you were told it was. Ayesha's eyes searched his face. I came with you because I chose to. Because I needed someone to carry me to where this must end. And because I looked at you by the river and saw a man who still has a conscience, even if he is trying very hard to ignore it. You're not making sense. No, not yet, but I will, she settled back. Make your coffee, Jacob Mercer. Rest tonight. Tomorrow I will begin to tell you things, and you will have to decide what kind of man you are. The kind your father raised or the kind Thomas Wardell paid for. The difference matters. Jacob made the coffee in silence, his mind churning. He'd expected many things from this job: difficulty, danger, perhaps pursuit by angry Comanche warriors. But he hadn't expected this. A woman who seemed to know more than she should, who spoke in riddles and truths both, who looked at him as if she could see straight through to the places he kept hidden even from himself. They ate in the flickering firelight, sharing the meager rations. Ayesha chewed the hard jerky thoughtfully, and once she smiled at something, a private thought he wasn't privy to, and the smile transformed her face, made her look young and almost mischievous. What? Jacob asked. I was remembering something my grandmother said once. The spirits have a sense of humor. They put us in impossible situations just to see what we will do. I think she would find this situation very amusing. I don't find any of this amusing. No, but you will someday. When it is over and you understand it. She set down the tin cup he'd given her. I need to sleep now. Where would you like me to be? The question made him uncomfortable. Near the fire. I'll sleep on the other side. Don't try to run in the night. I will not run. I have given my word, just as you have given yours. We will see which of us keeps it. Ayesha arranged her blanket on the ground and lay down, turning her back to the fire. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened into sleep. Jacob sat up for a long time, watching her and the fire both. She looked small and vulnerable in sleep, young, and he wondered again what he'd gotten himself into. The money that had seemed so important 3 days ago now felt tainted somehow, like holding coins he knew were stolen but couldn't quite bring himself to give back. The kind your father raised or the kind Thomas Wardell paid for? The difference matters. The words echoed in his mind as he finally lay down, using his saddle as a pillow, his gun within easy reach. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, he dreamed of his father's disappointed eyes and a woman who walked away across empty prairie until she became a speck, then a memory, then nothing at all. The second day dawned clear and hot. Jacob woke to find Ayesha already up, sitting on the canyon rim watching the sunrise paint the eastern sky in shades of orange and gold. She'd climbed up without waking him, a fact that should have alarmed him more than it did, and sat with her knees drawn up, her blanket around her shoulders, absolutely still. He made his way up to her, his boots scraping on stone. She didn't turn at his approach, but she said, "Good morning, Jacob Mercer." "Morning." He settled onto a rock nearby. "You could have run." "Yes, but where would I go that would solve anything? The problem is not the distance between me and my people. The problem is Thomas Wardell and what he wants. Running would only delay it. You keep talking like you know things. But you won't tell me what." "I will. Today." Ayesha finally looked at him. In the morning light, her eyes were the color of dark honey, flecked with gold. "But first, I need you to do something." "What?" "Listen to a story, the true story of why Wardell wants me. And when I am done, you must decide whether you still want to take me to him." Jacob's mouth went dry. "If you tell me something that changes the deal." "The deal was already a lie, Jacob. I am simply offering you the truth. Whether you accept it is your choice." She turned back to the sunrise. "Shall I begin?" Every instinct told him to refuse, to keep writing, to deliver her to Wardell and collect his money and go home before this got more complicated. But he'd given his word to listen. And more than that, he wanted to know. Some part of him, the part that had sat through countless evenings listening to his father's stories, the part that still believed in right and wrong, even when he was breaking his own rules, needed to understand. "All right," he said. "Tell me." Ayesha drew a deep breath. 3 months ago, Thomas Wardell made a proposal to my uncle, who was leader of our band. He wanted to buy our land, where we camp at Blue Mesa. He offered money, trade goods, a written agreement. My uncle refused. "The land is sacred to us, given by treaty, and we will not sell what is not ours to sell." Wardell mentioned cattle theft, not land disputes. "Yes, because cattle theft sounds like crime. Land theft sounds like business." Ayesha's voice remained calm, but Jacob heard the edge beneath it. "After my uncle refused, strange things began happening. Wardell's cattle disappeared from ranges near our camp. Witnesses said they saw Comanche riders. Tracks led toward Blue Mesa. It was very convenient." "You're saying Wardell rustled his own cattle to frame your people?" "I am saying that when powerful men want something and cannot buy it, they find other ways to take it. Wardell needs that land for his railroad scheme. Yes, I know about the railroad. Everyone knows. The tracks will go through Blue Mesa if he can clear us off it. And if we are blamed for cattle theft, if we are arrested or driven away or worse, then the land becomes available." Jacob felt something cold settle in his gut. "That's a serious accusation." "Yes, and I can prove it. Ayesha turned to face him fully now. 2 weeks ago, I followed the trail of stolen cattle. Not to Blue Mesa, but to a hidden canyon 20 miles south. I watched white men Wardell's men drive the cattle in. I watched them rebrand them. And I watched them shoot one of their own who protested, who said this was wrong. They left his body for the coyotes. Jesus Christ. I was careful. They did not see me. But I knew this information was dangerous. I knew if Wardell learned that someone could expose his scheme, that person would need to disappear. So I said nothing. I told no one. I hoped it would be enough. Her voice dropped. But it was not enough. Somehow he learned that I had been there. And so he sent you. Jacob stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the rim. Below, the canyon floor was still in shadow. Dancer, a dark shape beside the dead fire. His mind raced through the implications. If Ayesha was telling the truth, and some instinct she was, then he was part of something far worse than a simple kidnapping. He was helping a rich man eliminate a witness to murder. Why didn't you tell your people? He demanded. Because telling them would start a war. My uncle is old, but he is proud. He would confront Wardell. There would be violence. The army would be called. My people would be driven from their land anyway, and many would die in the process. Ayesha stood as well, moving to stand beside him. I chose silence to protect them. But silence has its own price. You could have gone to the law. The law? For the first time, real bitterness entered her voice. The law that sides with white men over Indians in every dispute. The law that watches as treaties are broken and says nothing. The law that is owned by men like Wardell. That law? Jacob had no answer. She was right, and they both knew it. So what do you want from me? He asked. Why tell me this? Because you are not like Wardell's other men. Because you have a conscience that troubles you. Because I hope that when faced with the truth, you will choose differently than you would have chosen in ignorance. Ayesha reached out and touched his arm, light as a breath. I am not asking you to save me, Jacob Mercer. I am asking you to see me, to understand what is really happening here, and then to make your choice with open eyes. Her hand fell away, but Jacob could still feel where she'd touched him, could still feel the weight of her gaze. If I don't take you to Wardell, he said slowly, I lose the money. The ranch, everything. Yes, and if I do take you, you'll probably die. Yes, that's not much of a choice. No, Ayesha agreed softly. It is not, but it is the choice you have. The choice we always have, between what serves us and what is right. They are not always the same thing. Jacob turned away from her, staring out at the vast empty land stretching in every direction. Somewhere out there was his ranch, the graves of his parents, the life he'd built and was losing piece by piece. Somewhere out there was Thomas Wardell, waiting for delivery of a woman he planned to silence forever. And somewhere inside Jacob's chest, his father's voice was speaking words he'd heard 1,000 times. A man's worth isn't in what he owns, but in what he's willing to sacrifice for what's right. Damn it, he said quietly. Yes, Ayesha said. Damn it indeed. They stood together on the canyon rim as the sun climbed higher, burning away the morning cool, revealing the hard day ahead. Jacob knew what he should do, what his father would have done, what his conscience demanded. But knowing and doing were separated by a gulf of fear and need and desperation that felt impossible to cross. I need time to think, he said finally. Then think. We have all day. Ayesha started back down to the canyon floor. But Jacob? Yeah? Whatever you decide it soon. The longer we travel toward Wardell, the harder it becomes to turn back. In all ways. She climbed down, leaving him alone with the sunrise and his thoughts, and a choice that felt like standing between two cliff edges, knowing he had to jump toward one or the other, and both looked equally likely to kill him. They broke camp in silence, both wrapped in their own thoughts. Jacob saddled Dancer methodically, going through motions he could do in his sleep. His hands knew the work even while his mind churned through everything Ayesha had told him. Part of him wanted to dismiss it as lies, a desperate attempt to manipulate him. But the details rang true: the hidden canyon, the rebranded cattle, the murdered witness. It had the texture of truth, the uncomfortable specificity of things that actually happened. And more than that, Ayesha herself rang true. She didn't plead or beg. She simply presented facts and let them stand. That took a particular kind of courage, and courage was hard to fake. "We're not riding to Wardell's ranch today," Jacob said as he helped her mount. No, I want to see this canyon you mentioned. The one where the cattle are hidden." Something flickered in Ayesha's eyes: hope, maybe, or relief. "It is 2 hours south of here, but if Wardell's men are there, then we'll be careful. I need to see it with my own eyes. You understand that?" "Yes, I understand." She settled into the saddle. "Thank you for that much at least. Don't thank me yet. Seeing it doesn't mean I'll do anything about it. No, but it is a step." She glanced back at him as he mounted behind her. "Sometimes a step is all we can manage." They rode south, angling away from the direct route to Wardell's ranch. The land here was more broken, cut through with arroyos and studded with mesas that rose like islands from the prairie floor. It was empty country, the kind of place where a man could hide things he didn't want found. Ayesha guided them without hesitation, pointing out landmarks that meant nothing to Jacob, clearly formed a map in her mind: a lightning-struck tree, a rock formation that looked like a seated figure, the dried course of a creek that only ran in spring. As they rode, she talked. Not about Wardell or cattle or danger, but about other things. She told him about her grandmother, who'd survived the terrible years when the Comanche were driven from their lands and forced onto reservations. She told him about learning to track from her uncle, about the summer she'd spent learning to weave from an old woman who'd since passed. She told him stories her people told about Coyote the trickster and the origin of death, and why the stars hung in the patterns they did. Jacob found himself listening not just to the words, but to the way she spoke them, the cadence and rhythm that turned simple stories into something more. She had a gift for it, a natural sense of when to pause and when to rush forward, when to whisper and when to let her voice ring out. "You should have been a teacher," he said at one point. "Like Mrs. Collins. Perhaps. Or perhaps I am teaching you now." Ayesha glanced back at him with a slight smile. "Is that not what this is? A lesson? About what?" "About seeing people instead of what we assume they are. About listening instead of judging. About the difference between what we want to be true and what is true. That's a lot of lessons for one ride. The best lessons always are." They stopped at noon near a spring that bubbled up from between two rocks, creating a small pool where grass grew green despite the drought. While Dancer drank, Jacob watched Ayesha walk the perimeter of the pool, studying the ground with that same intense focus he'd noticed before. "What do you see?" he asked. "Deer were here this morning. 3 of them, a doe and 2 yearlings, and men on horses yesterday. 4 riders heading west." She pointed at marks in the mud that Jacob could barely make out. They were not being careful. They did not expect anyone to read their signs. Wardell's men, perhaps, or ranchers, or anyone. But the tracks go toward the canyon where the cattle are hidden. She straightened. "We should be very quiet from here." They approached the canyon carefully, leaving Dancer tied in a grove of stunted oaks while they went forward on foot. The land rose and fell in waves, and Ayesha used the terrain with practiced skill, always keeping them in cover, always moving when the wind blew to mask any sounds they might make. Jacob had hunted enough to appreciate her woodcraft. She moved like smoke, like a shadow, barely disturbing the grass. He followed as best he could, feeling clumsy despite his own experience. The canyon opened before them suddenly, a gash in the earth maybe 100 yards across and twice that deep. Cottonwoods grew along the bottom where water must run in the wet season, and the walls were sheer enough that there'd be only one way in or out, perfect for hiding things. Ayesha and Jacob lay on their bellies at the canyon rim, looking down. At first, Jacob saw nothing suspicious, just canyon, trees, shadows. Then movement caught his eye. Cattle, maybe 30 head, grazing in the small meadow at the canyon floor. And near them, 2 men lounging near a small fire. "Watch," Ayesha whispered. Jacob watched. And as his eyes adjusted, he began to see what she meant. The cattle all bore fresh brands, the kind that would still be healing, still obvious if someone looked close. And the brands were Wardell's, the rocking W that everyone in the territory knew. But on several animals, if you looked carefully at the right angle, you could see the shadow of an older brand underneath. Crude work, quick work, the kind done by men in a hurry. "Jesus," Jacob breathed. "Now do you believe me?" He did. The evidence was right there below them, and suddenly all of Wardell's story collapsed like a house built on sand. This wasn't about cattle theft by Indians. This was about manufacturing evidence, creating a justification to drive people off land that a rich man wanted. And Jacob had been the tool Wardell chose to make it happen. "We need to go," he said. "Now, before they see us." They backed away from the rim carefully, then rose and moved quickly back to where Dancer waited. Jacob's mind was racing, heart pounding with a mixture of anger and shame and something that might have been fear. "What will you do?" Ayesha asked when they'd mounted again. "I don't know." Jacob turned Dancer north, away from the canyon, away from Wardell's ranch. "But I'm not taking you to Wardell. That much I know. And the money?" "To hell with the money." The words came out more forcefully than he'd intended. "I won't be part of this. I won't help a man commit murder just to save my ranch." Ayesha was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very softly, "Your father would be proud." Jacob's throat tightened. He couldn't speak, so he just nodded and kept riding. They had hours still before dark, and he needed to figure out what came next. Taking Ayesha back to her people was the obvious choice, but it wouldn't solve the larger problem. Wardell would just send others men without consciences, men who wouldn't hesitate or question. Ayesha would never be safe as long as she could expose Wardell's scheme, which meant they needed to do more than run. They needed to stop him. "The man who was killed," Jacob said. "The one who protested. Did you recognize him?" "No, but I saw him clearly. Young, maybe 25. Light hair, tall. He wore a brown vest with silver buttons. That's not much to go on. Perhaps not. But if he worked for Wardell, others would know him. Others might wonder where he went." Ayesha shifted against him. "People disappear on the frontier all the time. But if someone asked the right questions, they'd need proof, evidence, something more than your word." Jacob thought hard. "The body, if it's still there. It has been 2 weeks. The coyotes and buzzards," she trailed off. "Still, it's something. And if we could get someone to look at the cattle, see the rebranded hides." Jacob felt the beginnings of a plan forming, fragile and risky, but better than nothing. "There's a U.S. Marshal in Red Creek, Tom Bannon. He's honest, or as honest as lawmen get out here. If we could get him to see what's in that canyon." "Wardell owns the sheriff," Ayesha interrupted, "and half the town council. Do you think a federal marshal could move against him without warning?" "Bannon's federal. He doesn't answer to the local law. And if the evidence is solid enough, even Wardell's money won't protect him." "You have more faith in the law than I do, Jacob Mercer." "Maybe, but it's better than running and hiding and waiting for Wardell's next attempt." Jacob felt something settling in his chest, a resolution that came with its own kind of peace. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe. Then I'm going to Red Creek to find Marshal Bannon. I'll tell him everything about the cattle, about you, about what Wardell's planning. Maybe he'll listen, maybe he won't, but I have to try. And where is somewhere safe?" Jacob knew only one place that fit that description. "My ranch. It's off the main trails, defensible if it needs to be. You can stay there while I'm gone. It's not much, but you would bring me to your home, trust me there alone. You trusted me with the truth. Seems only fair I return the favor." He paused. "Besides, you already said you could have run a dozen times by now." I figure if you haven't yet, you won't when it matters. Aisha was silent for a long moment. Then she reached back and briefly squeezed his hand where it rested on the saddle horn. Thank you, Jacob, for believing me, for choosing this path. I know what it costs you. I haven't saved anything yet. Don't thank me until we're through this. No, I will thank you now, because the choice matters more than the outcome. You chose rightly. That is its own victory. They rode through the afternoon and into the evening, heading northeast toward Jacob's ranch. The land grew more familiar with each mile, and as the sun began to set, Jacob felt the strange sensation of coming home while everything had changed. He was returning to the same place, but he was not the same man. 3 days ago, he'd have sold a woman to save his ranch. Now he was risking everything to save her instead. He still didn't know if it was the right choice in any practical sense. But his father's voice in his head had finally gone quiet, and that had to mean something. As darkness fell, they crested a rise, and there below was the ranch. Small, shabby, half falling apart. Home. It's not much, Jacob said, suddenly embarrassed by how little he had to offer. But Aisha was smiling. It's perfect, she said softly. It's real. That is more than enough. They rode down toward the dark buildings, toward whatever came next, together. The ranch house was dark and cold when they arrived, the kind of cold that speaks of long absence and neglect. Jacob lit a lamp while Aisha waited in the doorway, and in its flickering light, he saw the place through her eyes, the rough-hewn table with uneven legs, the fireplace with its stones crumbling, the bare cupboards, the single chair, the rope bed in the corner with its thin mattress. I told you it wasn't much, he said. I have seen worse. Aisha stepped inside, her footsteps echoing on the wood floor. And this is yours. That matters. While Jacob started a fire in the fireplace, Aisha explored the single room that made up the main house. She touched things lightly, the table, the window frame, the shelf with its 3 books and tin cup. She moved with that same careful attention she brought to everything, as if the objects could tell her stories about the man who owned them. Your mother? She asked, stopping before the small daguerreotype on the shelf. The image was faded, showing a young woman with serious eyes and dark hair. I never knew her. She died the day I was born. But my father kept that. Said she was the bravest person he ever knew, to cross the plains while pregnant, to build a life out here where there was nothing. He loved her until the day he died. You look like her. Jacob glanced at the photograph, startled. He'd always been told he looked like his father. You think so? The eyes. The set of the mouth. Yes. She would be proud of you too, I think. The fire caught, spreading warmth through the room. Jacob put coffee on to boil real coffee this time, the last of what he'd been hoarding, and found some beans and bacon to fry up. It wasn't much of a meal, but it was better than jerky. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes when words have been used up and what's left is simply presence. Outside, Dancer was settled in the small barn with hay and water, and the night was quiet except for the pop and crackle of the fire. I'll leave at first light, Jacob said finally. It's half a day's ride to Red Creek. If I push hard, I can find Marshal Bannon, explain everything, and be back by tomorrow night. You'll be safe here. And if Wardell's men come looking, they won't know to look here, not yet. I've kept my head down, didn't tell anyone about the job. Far as anyone knows, I'm just struggling to keep my ranch from failing. Jacob set down his tin plate. But just in case, there's a rifle on the rack. You know how to shoot? My uncle taught me. I am adequate, not expert. Adequate is enough. Lock the door after I leave. Don't open it unless you hear me call out. There's a root cellar out back. If someone does come, that's where you hide. There's another door in it that leads to the gully behind the house. Follow it north, you'll hit the creek. Follow the creek east, and you'll eventually reach the trading post. Tell them you're a friend of mine. Aisha nodded, absorbing all of this. You have thought this through. I've thought about defense since I was old enough to hold a gun. You don't survive out here without planning for trouble. Jacob paused. But it won't come to that. I'll be back before anything happens. You cannot promise that. No, but I can try. They sat by the fire as it burned down, both lost in thought. Jacob found himself watching Ayesha's profile, the way the firelight played across her features, the strength and grace she carried even in stillness. Somewhere in the past 3 days, she'd stopped being a job, a problem, a thing to be transported. She'd become a person, real and complete, someone whose laughter he wanted to hear, whose safety mattered more than money or land or anything else he'd thought important. "Tell me something," he said. "Why didn't you hate me? Back at the river, when I came to take you. You could have been angry, could have fought, but you just came. Why?" Ayesha considered the question. "Because hatred takes energy, and I needed that energy for other things. Because I could see you were not evil, only desperate. And because," she turned to look at him directly, "because I have learned that people are capable of change. If I had hated you at the river, I would have closed the door to that possibility. Instead, I left it open. And you walked through. You took a hell of a risk. All worthwhile things are risks," she smiled slightly. "Besides, I told you. I saw something in you that could not exist alongside true cruelty." "What did you see?" "Shame, doubt, the knowledge that what you were doing was wrong, even as you did it. Only good men feel those things, Jacob. Bad men do not trouble themselves with conscience." Jacob looked away, uncomfortable with her insight, with being seen so clearly. "I'm not good. I was willing to sell you for $40. Were. Past tense. You are not the man you were 3 days ago." Ayesha reached out and touched his hand where it rested on his knee. "Do not punish yourself for what you were willing to do. Celebrate instead what you chose to do when given all the information. That is who you truly are." Her hand was warm on his, and Jacob found he didn't want her to move it. For a long moment, they sat like that, connected by that small touch, the fire burning down between them. "I should sleep," Jacob said finally, though he didn't want to. "Long ride tomorrow." "Yes, but Ayesha didn't move immediately." "Jacob, yeah? When this is over, if we survive this, what will you do?" The question caught him off guard. "I don't know. Try to save the ranch, I suppose." Though after crossing Wardell, he shook his head. "Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe some things aren't meant to be saved." "I think your ranch will be fine," Ayesha said quietly. "I think you will find that when you stop fighting so hard to hold on to what you have, what you need will come to you instead. That's a nice philosophy. But it doesn't pay banknotes." "No, but it brings peace. And peace is worth more than property." She stood, stretching. "I will sleep now." "You should too." Jacob gave her the bed, the only bed, and made himself a pallet near the fireplace. It wasn't comfortable, but he'd slept worse places. As he lay there, listening to Ayesha's breathing slow and deepen into sleep, he thought about everything that had happened, everything that would happen tomorrow. He was about to go up against the most powerful man in the territory. He was risking his ranch, his freedom, possibly his life, for a woman he'd known 3 days, for the sake of doing what his father would have done. And somehow, lying there on the hard floor with nothing but conscience and hope to his name, Jacob Mercer felt richer than he had in 3 years. He fell asleep with that thought, and dreamed of things that might be, if they lived long enough to see them. Jacob woke before dawn to find Ayesha already up, standing at the window, and looking out at the dark land beyond. She'd wrapped his one spare blanket around her shoulders, and in the pre-dawn gray, she looked like something from a dream, unreal and beautiful. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. She turned slightly. "I slept, but I woke thinking." "About what?" "About what happens if they do not believe you. If the marshal thinks you are lying, or if Wardell has already prepared alibis for what we saw." She met his eyes. "About what we do then." Jacob had been thinking the same thing. "Then we run. Take you somewhere Wardell can't reach, Montana maybe, or California. And your ranch? Loses one more thing to worry about." He stood, stretching. Land is land, Ayesha. It'll be here long after we're gone. But you can't come back from dead. I would not want you to lose everything for me. Too late. I already have. But he smiled when he said it. Besides, I'm starting to think maybe that's not the loss I thought it was. He made coffee and fried the last of the bacon for breakfast. They ate quickly, both aware of the need to get moving, to set things in motion before Wardell realized his plan had gone wrong. When it was time to go, Jacob saddled Dancer and checked his gun's revolver and rifle both. He wasn't expecting trouble on the road, but expecting and preparing were different things. Ayesha walked him to the barn. In the growing light, he could see the concern in her eyes, carefully controlled, but there nonetheless. "Be careful," she said. "Wardell is dangerous, and desperate men do desperate things." "I know. That's why I'm going to the marshal instead of confronting him directly." Jacob swung into the saddle. "Remember what I said. Lock the door, stay quiet. I'll be back by nightfall. And if you are not?" He'd been trying not to think about that. "Then follow the escape route I showed you. Get to the trading post. Ask for John 12 Horses. He's Comanche, married to a white woman, good people. Tell him what happened. He'll help you get somewhere safe." Ayesha nodded, but her eyes held doubt. "I do not like this plan. Too many things could go wrong. You have a better one?" "Yes, I come with you. We face this together. Too dangerous. Wardell's men could spot you, and then it's over before it starts. And if they spot you? If Wardell has already set men to watch for you." She stepped closer, laying her hand on his leg. "Jacob, this started with both of us. It should end with both of us." He wanted to say yes. God help him. He wanted her with him, wanted her voice and her presence and her quiet strength at his side. But this was his mess to clean up, his mistake to fix. He wouldn't risk her more than he already had. "Stay here," he said gently. "Please, I need to know you're safe so I can focus on what needs doing." For a long moment, she held his gaze. Then she stepped back. "All right. I will stay. But Jacob? Yeah? Come back. Whatever happens with the marshal, with Wardell, with everything else, just come back. I will." He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her things he barely understood himself. But the words tangled in his throat, and all he could manage was "I promise." She stood in the barn doorway as he rode away, the rising sun behind her turning her silhouette into something almost ethereal. Jacob looked back once and saw her raise her hand in farewell, and he raised his own in return. Then he turned Dancer toward Red Creek and kicked him into a ground-eating lope. The ride gave him time to think, to rehearse what he'd say to Marshal Bannon. The story was complicated, and without Ayesha there to corroborate it, Jacob knew he'd have to be convincing. He'd have to make Bannon see the truth of it, feel it, understand why a struggling rancher would turn down $40 to protect a woman he barely knew. The morning was cool and clear, the kind of day that made a man grateful to be alive. Jacob tried not to think of it as possibly his last such day. Red Creek appeared on the horizon around mid-morning, its buildings low and squat against the prairie. It wasn't much of a town. One main street, 2 saloons, a general store, a church that doubled as a school, and a dozen other buildings in various states of repair. But it was the county seat, which meant it had a jail and usually a marshal. Jacob hitched Dancer outside the marshal's office and paused before going in. This was the moment. Once he started talking, there'd be no going back. He'd be declaring himself against Thomas Wardell, and that was not a thing done lightly. Your father would do it, he thought, and so will you. He pushed open the door. The office was small and cluttered, papers stacked on every surface, a gun rack on one wall, a potbelly stove in the corner. Behind the desk sat Marshal Tom Bannon, a weathered man in his 50s with gray shot through his beard and eyes that had seen too much to be easily surprised. "Jacob Mercer," Bannon said, looking up. "Haven't seen you in town for a while. Ranch keeping you busy?" "You could say that." Jacob closed the door behind him. "I need to talk to you, Marshal. About something serious." Bannon's expression shifted, became more focused. "Sit down, talk," Jacob sat. And then, choosing his words carefully, he told the whole story from Wardell's offer in the saloon, to taking Aisha from her camp, to everything she'd told him, to the hidden canyon with its rebranded cattle and the dead man left for scavengers. He left nothing out, including his own shame at having agreed to the job in the first place. Bannon listened without interrupting, his face giving away nothing. When Jacob finished, the marshal sat back in his chair and steepled his fingers under his chin. "That's quite a story," he said finally. "It's the truth. Maybe, but truth and proof are different things, and I'd need considerable proof before I could move against Thomas Wardell." Bannon fixed Jacob with a hard stare. "You understand what you're accusing him of? Fraud, cattle rustling, murder, conspiracy to commit forced removal of Indians under false pretenses. Any one of those charges would be career-ending if proven. All of them together could see him hanged. I understand. And I'm ready to testify to everything I saw and heard. You and this Comanche woman, Aisha, you said?" "Yes, she's at my ranch. She's safe there. Is she now?" Bannon's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's interesting. Because I had a visitor yesterday afternoon, Thomas Wardell himself. Came to report that one of his hired men, a rancher named Jacob Mercer, had kidnapped a Comanche woman and was holding her for ransom. Said he'd paid you good money for an honest job and you'd betrayed his trust. Asked me to arrest you on sight." Jacob felt cold flood through him. "That's a lie." "Oh, I know it's a lie. Wardell's not smart enough to keep his story straight. Claimed you took the woman 2 days ago, but the timeline didn't work. Also claimed he'd never met you before hiring you, but I happen to know you've done business with him in the past." Bannon leaned forward. "But here's what troubles me, Mercer. If Wardell's going to the trouble of setting you up before you can expose him, that means he knows you're a threat. Which means he probably knows where you've been and what you've been doing. Which means he knows where my ranch is." Jacob was on his feet before he'd finished thinking. "He knows Aisha's there. Sit down, Mercer. Running off half-cocked won't help anyone. I have to get back. If he sends men, you riding in alone won't stop them. But me riding in with a federal warrant and 3 deputies might give them pause." Bannon was already on his feet, reaching for his hat and gun belt. "How many men would Wardell likely send?" "I don't know. 4? 5? Enough to be sure of the job. Then we'll need to move fast. My deputies are out on patrol, but I can round up some volunteers from the town. Men who owe me favors, who won't ask too many questions." Bannon grabbed his rifle from the rack. "Your ranch is, what, 4 hours ride?" 3 if we push. Then we push. "But Mercer, listen to me." The marshal's voice was hard. "If we get there and that woman is already gone or dead, if we find Wardell's men and they put up a fight, if this goes sideways in any way, you follow my lead. You don't go off seeking revenge or justice on your own. You understand? I'm putting my career on the line here based on your word. Don't make me regret it." "I understand." "Good, then let's ride." They left Red Creek 20 minutes later, Jacob, Marshal Bannon, and 4 other men. The volunteers were a mixed group. A shopkeeper who'd been a cavalry sergeant, 2 ranch hands between jobs, and an old Texas Ranger named Clay, who claimed to be 70, but rode like he was 30. They pushed their horses hard, not quite running but covering ground fast enough to eat up the miles. Jacob rode in a haze of fear and rage, his mind filled with images of what he might find when they reached the ranch. Aisha dead, Aisha taken, the house burning. All the possibilities were terrible. She's smart, he told himself. She hide if they come. She used the escape route. She survive. But knowing something was possible and believing it would happen were different things. They rode through the afternoon heat, stopping only once to water the horses at a creek. As they rode, Bannon explained what would happen when they arrived. "If Wardell's men are there, I'll identify myself as federal law and order them to stand down. If they comply, we arrest them and sort it out at trial. If they don't, He patted his rifle. Then we do what's necessary to preserve an innocent life, same as if they were any other criminals. And Wardell? Jacob asked. Wardell's trickier. He won't be there himself, he's too smart for that. But if we can take some of his men alive, get them to testify against him in exchange for reduced charges, we might have enough to bring him in. Bannon glanced at Jacob. This is going to be a long process, Mercer. Months, maybe. And it's going to cost you. Wardell will come after you legally and financially both. You ready for that? I'm ready. Jacob was surprised to find he meant it. 3 days ago, he'd been willing to do almost anything to save his ranch. Now he was willing to lose it if it meant stopping Wardell. Funny how priorities could shift so completely in such a short time. The sun was sliding toward the western horizon when they crested the final rise before Jacob's ranch. He pulled up short, the others stopping beside him, and they all looked down at what lay below. Smoke. Not the smoke of a cooking fire or a warming hearth. Black smoke, thick and oily, rising from what had been Jacob's barn. And around the main house, 5 horses stood tied, their riders nowhere in sight. Son of a bitch, Jacob breathed. Easy, Bannon said. We go in smart. Clay, you and Henderson circle around back in case they run. Mercer, you're with me. The rest of you, spread out and cover the approaches. Nobody shoots unless I give the word. Clear? They nodded and split up, moving down the slope toward the ranch. Jacob's heart hammered so hard he could hear it in his ears. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames reaching high enough to be seen for miles. Dancer had been in that barn. And maybe Ayesha, if she'd hidden there instead of using the root cellar. Please, he prayed to whatever god might be listening. Please let her be all right. They approached the house from the east, using the cover of the gully and the few scraggly trees. As they got closer, Jacob could hear men's voices, angry and frustrated. Not in the damn root cellar, I told you. Then where the hell is she? The horse is here. She can't have gone far on foot. Maybe she's in the house. Maybe she's hiding in the walls or something. God damn it, Wardell said she'd be easy. Said she was just an Indian girl. Nobody said she'd disappear like a damn ghost. Relief flooded through Jacob so intense it made him dizzy. She wasn't in the barn. She wasn't captured. She was somewhere hiding, surviving. Bannon signaled for Jacob to stay low, and they crept closer to the house. Through the window, Jacob could see 3 men inside, tearing the place apart. Overturned table, smashed cupboards, his few belongings scattered across the floor. They were looking for Ayesha, and from their frustration, they hadn't found her. 2 more men were outside, one standing guard by the horses, the other trying to control the barn fire that was clearly burning beyond their control. Bannon checked his revolver, then looked at Jacob and mouthed, "Ready?" Jacob nodded. The marshal stood up from behind the water trough and called out in a voice that carried like thunder, "Federal Marshal! All of you, hands where I can see them. Now!" For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The men inside the house froze. The guards outside turned toward Bannon's voice. The world held its breath. Then everything went to hell. The guard by the horses went for his gun. Clay, who'd circled around back, shot him in the shoulder before he'd cleared leather. The man went down screaming, and the horses spooked, pulling at their ties. The second guard ran straight into Henderson, who tackled him into the dirt. And from inside the house came the sound of breaking glass as one of the men dove through the window, hitting the ground hard and rolling. He came up with his gun drawn, saw Bannon, and fired. The shot went wide, but it started the shooting in earnest. Bannon returned fire, driving the man back behind the water trough. The other 2 men in the house started shooting through the windows, and suddenly the air was full of gunfire and smoke and shouting. Jacob dropped behind the gully edge and fired at the window, trying not to think about the fact that they were shooting up his house, his home, the last thing his father had left him. Wood splintered and glass shattered, and he heard someone inside cursing. The fight lasted maybe 2 minutes, but it felt like hours. When it ended, 4 of Wardell's men were down, 1 dead, 1 seriously wounded, 2 with minor injuries and their hands up in surrender. The 5th had tried to run and made it maybe 50 yards before Clay shot his horse out from under him. He lay now in the dirt, hands on his head, begging not to be shot. "Secure them," Bannon ordered, and the volunteers moved to bind the prisoner's hands. The marshal turned to Jacob. "Your woman, where would she have gone?" "I don't know. The root cellar's out, but there are places." Jacob was already moving, calling out, "Ayesha, it's Jacob. It's safe now, you can come out." Nothing. Just the crackle of the barn burning and the moans of the wounded men. "Ayesha." He tried again, louder. "Please, it's over." For a long, terrible moment, there was only silence. Then, from behind the house, a voice. "Jacob?" He ran, rounding the corner to find Ayesha emerging from the creek gully, soaking wet and covered in mud, but very much alive. She saw him and something broke in her face. Relief, fear, joy, all mixed together, and then she was running toward him. They collided hard enough to hurt, but Jacob didn't care. He wrapped his arms around her and held on like she might disappear if he let go. And she held him just as tightly, her face buried against his chest. "I thought," his voice broke. "When I saw the smoke, I thought." "I hid in the creek," she said, her words muffled against his shirt, "under the bank where the roots overhang. I heard them searching, but they did not think to look in the water." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "You came back. I promised I would." "Yes, and you keep your promises." Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. "You are a good man, Jacob Mercer." "I told you that you were." He wanted to kiss her. God, he wanted to kiss her more than he'd wanted anything in his entire life. But this wasn't the time, not with prisoners to deal with and a barn burning and a dozen things that needed doing. Instead, he just held her for another moment, breathing in the smell of creek water and mud in her, alive and safe in his arms. Then he made himself step back. "Come on," he said. "Let's finish this." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of activity. They extinguished what was left of the barn fire, too late to save the structure, but soon enough to keep it from spreading. The prisoners were bound and secured, their weapons confiscated. The man who'd been shot in the shoulder would live, Bannon declared, though he wouldn't be using that arm properly for a while. And then came the questioning. Bannon was methodical and thorough, interviewing each man separately. Most stayed quiet at first, loyal to Wardell, or at least to the money he'd paid them. But the youngest one, a kid no more than 20, cracked when the marshal offered him a deal. "Mr. Wardell said she was a thief," the kid said, his voice shaking. "Said she'd stolen from him and we were just getting back what was his, that's all. I didn't know we'd be hurting anyone." "Who gave you the orders to come here?" Bannon asked. "Mr. Wardell. Yesterday. Said Jacob Mercer had taken something of his, and we were to get it back. By any means necessary, he said. That's all I know, I swear." The others, seeing the kid talk, began opening up too. It all poured out Wardell's instructions, the promised bonuses, the casual orders to make sure there were no witnesses if things went badly. One man admitted to being at the canyon where the rebranded cattle were kept. Another described seeing Wardell himself shoot the young man who'd protested the plan. By the time full dark fell, Bannon had enough evidence to hang Thomas Wardell 3 times over. "We ride for Red Creek at first light," the marshal announced. "These men will stand trial, and their testimony will be used to arrest Wardell. It won't be quick, and it won't be easy, but justice will be done." He turned to Jacob and Ayesha, who'd been sitting together by the remains of the barn, watching the proceedings. "You two did something brave and foolish today. Emphasis on the foolish. But you also did the right thing, and that counts for a lot. Miss Ayesha, I'll need your formal testimony as well. Are you willing to give it?" "I am," she said firmly. "I will tell everything I saw." "Good. You'll both be under federal protection until the trial concludes. Wardell has reach, but he doesn't have enough reach to touch you while you're under my watch." Bannon paused. "Though I'd recommend not staying here, Mercer. Place is too isolated, Too easy for Wardell's friends to find. You got somewhere else you can go? Jacob looked at the ruins of his barn, at his shot-up house, at the land that had cost him so much to keep. And he realized with startling clarity that it didn't matter anymore. The ranch was just land and wood. What mattered was sitting beside him, muddy and tired, but alive. "I'll figure something out," he said. After Bannon and the others had made camp for the night, Jacob and Aisha sat together by a small fire, separate from the main group. The stars overhead were bright and close, and the night air carried the first real chill of autumn. "Your barn is gone," Aisha said quietly. "I am sorry. It was old anyway. Needed replacing." Jacob stirred the fire with a stick. "Besides, Dancer wasn't in it." "That's what matters, is it?" She looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes. "Or is there something else that matters more?" He couldn't pretend he didn't understand. "Yeah, there's something else. What will you do now, after the trial, after everything is settled?" Jacob had been thinking about that all evening. "I don't know. The ranch. I can't afford to rebuild it. Can't afford to keep it even without the rebuilding. The bank will take it in a few months regardless, so maybe it's time to let it go. Find something else. Like what?" "Haven't figured that out yet." He looked at her. "What about you? Will you go back to your people?" Aisha was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know if I can. After what has happened, after the testimony I will give, there will be white people who hate me for speaking against Wardell, and there will be Comanche who distrust me for working with the law. I may find myself belonging nowhere." "That's not true, isn't it?" She smiled sadly. "I walk between worlds, Jacob. I always have. It is lonely sometimes." Jacob reached out and took her hand. It was the first time he'd deliberately touched her since the moment she'd come running from the creek. Her fingers were cool and small in his, and they fit there like they'd been made to. "You don't have to be lonely," he said quietly. "Not if you don't want to be." Aisha turned to look at him, and in the firelight, her eyes reflected gold. "What are you saying, Jacob Mercer?" "I'm saying," he took a breath, "I'm saying that 3 days ago you were a job, a problem. Something I needed to transport and deliver. But somewhere along the way, you became the most important thing in my world. And I know it's fast, I know it's probably crazy, but I can't imagine going back to a life where you're not in it. So I'm asking, when this is all over, when Wardell's convicted and you're free, would you maybe consider staying with me? Staying how? However you want. As friends. As partners. As..." He couldn't quite say the word, but he didn't need to. It hung in the air between them, obvious and terrifying and true. Aisha's eyes were wet again, but she was smiling. "You would give up your ranch, your home, your whole life for someone you met 3 days ago?" "I already did. The minute I decided not to take you to Wardell. That was about doing right. This is about love. They are not the same. No, but they're not separate either." Jacob squeezed her hand gently. "I don't have much to offer you, Aisha. No property, no money, no prospects. Just me, just a man who's trying to be better than he was. But if that's enough, if you'd be willing to take a chance on me, then yes. I'm saying I love you. I know it's too soon. I know it's not practical. I know." She kissed him. It was soft and brief, and tasted like creek water and hope, and when she pulled back, she was smiling more broadly than he'd ever seen. "It is not too soon," she said. "And it is the most practical thing in the world. Love is the only thing worth building a life on." She touched his face gently. "Yes, Jacob Mercer. I will stay with you. We will build something new together. Something that belongs to neither your world nor mine, but to both." Jacob pulled her close, and they sat like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms while the fire burned down to embers and the stars wheeled overhead. Around them, the night was peaceful, full of the small sounds of horses shifting and men snoring and the wind moving through the grass. The future was uncertain. The trial would be difficult. Starting over would be hard. But for the first time in 3 years, Jacob felt like he had something worth building toward, instead of just fighting to hold on to what was already falling apart. He'd come to this place a man willing to sell a woman for $40. He was leaving it someone who'd risk everything to keep her safe. The difference was everything. "Thank you," Ayesha whispered against his chest. "For what?" "For listening. For choosing right. For becoming the man you were meant to be." She tilted her head back to look at him. "And for promising to come back. I did not realize until you were gone how much I needed you to keep that promise." "I'll always come back," Jacob said. "That's one promise you'll never have to doubt." "Good," she settled against him again. "Because I am very much in love with you, Jacob Mercer, and I will not let you go easily." He laughed, and it felt like a weight lifting from his chest, like breathing deep after holding his breath too long. "I wouldn't want you to." They stayed like that until the fire died completely. Two people who'd started as captor and captive, become allies, and ended as something more. Something that had no name in English or Comanche, something that could only be called hope or future or love. The old life was over. The new one had just begun. And neither of them could wait to see what it held. The trial of Thomas Wardell took place 3 months later in the territorial court in Red Creek. It was a spectacle unlike anything the small town had ever seen. Newspaper reporters came from as far away as Denver and San Antonio. The courtroom was packed every day with townspeople, ranchers, curious onlookers, and people who'd traveled hundreds of miles just to see justice done. Wardell hired the best lawyers money could buy, but they couldn't overcome the mountain of evidence. 5 of his own men testified against him, describing in detail the cattle rustling scheme, the murdered man, the orders to eliminate Ayesha. The physical evidence was even more damning: rebranded hides, accounting ledgers showing false reports of losses, even a witness who'd seen Wardell himself at the hidden canyon. But the testimony that sealed his fate came from Ayesha. She took the stand on a cold January morning, dressed in a simple dress that Mrs. Sarah Collins had once given her, and told her story in clear, measured tones. She described tracking the stolen cattle, watching Wardell's men at work, seeing the young cowhand murdered for protesting. She answered every question put to her without hesitation, and when Wardell's lawyers tried to discredit her, she met their attacks with such calm dignity that even the most prejudiced observer had to respect her. Jacob watched from the gallery, pride and love swelling in his chest. This woman, his woman now, in every way that mattered, was stronger than anyone he'd ever known. She stood there and faced down power and prejudice and hate, and she did it without flinching. The verdict came down on a Thursday afternoon, guilty on all counts. Thomas Wardell would hang within the month. The courtroom erupted in cheers and shouts, and through it all, Ayesha remained calm. She made her way through the crowd to where Jacob waited, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close while the chaos swirled around them. "It's over," he whispered. "No," she said, smiling up at him. "It's just beginning." They were married in the spring, in a small ceremony at the trading post. Not many came: John 12 Horses and his wife, Marshall Bannon, a few folks from Red Creek who'd come to respect Ayesha during the trial, and most of Ayesha's band from Blue Mesa. It was a strange mix of cultures and traditions, but somehow it worked. They spoke vows in English and Comanche both, and an old priest who'd known Mrs. Collins blessed the union with words that belonged to neither culture, but to something older and simpler. "Love recognizes no borders," he said. "It speaks all languages and acknowledges all peoples. May your love be a bridge between worlds, a light in the darkness, and a refuge from the storm." Jacob had worried that the marriage would be difficult, that the differences between them would prove too great. But he'd underestimated both Ayesha's adaptability and his own capacity to change. She taught him to see the land differently, to read signs he'd walked past his whole life, to understand the stories the earth told. He taught her about ranching, not as conquest but as partnership with the land, about building systems that worked with nature instead of against it. They didn't return to his old ranch. The bank had taken it, as he'd known they would, and someone else was working that land now. Instead, They pooled what little money they had, including a reward from the territorial government for their role in bringing Wardle to justice, and bought a small piece of property near the trading post. Not a ranch exactly. More like a homestead, with room for a garden and a few animals and the possibility of growth. It was enough. More than enough. Ayesha's people visited often, and Jacob found himself learning their language, their ways, their stories. He'd spent years fighting Indians and fearing them, and now here he was, part of a Comanche family, accepted and valued. It was strange and wonderful both. And slowly, carefully, they built something new. Not just a life, but a vision of what life could be when people chose to see each other as human first, different second. Word spread about the couple at the trading post, the white rancher and the Comanche woman who'd brought down a powerful man together. People came seeking their advice, their mediation, their perspective. They became, without quite intending to, a bridge between the white settlements and the Indian bands, still trying to exist in a world that wanted them gone. It wasn't easy work. There were setbacks and disappointments, moments of anger and frustration on both sides. But they kept at it, kept building, kept hoping. And through it all, their love deepened and grew, becoming the foundation upon which everything else was built. On a warm evening in late summer, Jacob and Ayesha sat on the porch of their small house, watching the sun set over the prairie. Ayesha's hand rested on her belly, where a child was growing, their child, who would belong to both worlds and hopefully to neither, who would make their own path through a changing West. "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob asked. "Everything that happened. Everything you lost." Ayesha considered the question. "I lost nothing that mattered," she said finally. "I gained everything, a home, a partner, a future I could not have imagined. And you? Do you regret?" "Not for a second." Jacob covered her hand with his. "Best $40 I never spent." She laughed, and the sound carried across the prairie, warm and rich and free. "Yes, very wise investment. To not spend money and gain everything. That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant." She leaned against him, content. "Do you know what my grandmother said when I told her we were to be married?" "What?" she said. "Some things are written in the stars long before we know to look for them. You found each other because you were meant to. The spirits brought you together in the only way that could work through hardship and choice and change. She blessed us, Jacob. She said we would be happy, and we would help others find happiness, and our children would walk in two worlds with pride. Smart woman, your grandmother, the smartest. She knows things before they happen. She knew I would leave with you that morning by the river. She knew I would come home changed. She knew you would be my husband before I even met you. Now you're just making things up. Perhaps," Ayesha smiled secretively. "Or perhaps some things really are written in the stars." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. Somewhere out there, the land stretched endlessly in every direction, full of possibility and danger both. But here on this porch, with this woman beside him and a child on the way, and a future that felt less like loss and more like adventure, Jacob Mercer was the richest man alive. He'd set out to steal a woman and had ended up stealing his own heart back from the darkness. It was the best trade he'd ever made. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know." Ayesha turned her head and kissed him, soft and sweet. "I love you too, every day more. Every day better. Even when I'm old and gray and can't ride anymore. Especially then. I will tell you stories by the fire, and you will listen and smile, and we will grow old together watching our grandchildren play. It will be good, Jacob, all of it. Because we chose it together." "Yes," he agreed. "We did." The stars came out one by one, brilliant against the darkening sky. Jacob recognized some of the constellations his father had taught him, and Ayesha pointed out different ones her people knew, different stories written in the same lights. Both true, both beautiful, both part of the same vast tapestry that held them all. In the distance, a coyote called, lonely and wild. Ayesha smiled at the sound. "Coyote is laughing at us," she said. He thinks he's so clever, bringing us together through trickery and trouble. Is that what happened? Coyote played tricks? All good things come from Coyote's tricks. He is chaos, yes. But from chaos comes creation. From confusion comes clarity. From trouble, she gestured at the two of them, comes love. Then I guess I'm grateful to Coyote, as am I. She settled against him again, and they watched the night deepen around them. Tell me, Jacob, if you could go back to that morning by the river, knowing everything you know now, would you still come? He thought about it, really thought about it. About the fear and shame and difficulty of those first days. About the danger and the loss and the pain of change. About everything it had cost to get here. Yes, he said finally. 1,000 times yes, because every hard moment led me to you. And you're worth any price. That, Ayasha said softly, is the right answer. They stayed on the porch until the moon rose, fat and full and silver. And when they finally went inside, it was hand in hand, partners in every sense, ready to face whatever tomorrow brought. The rancher who'd been sent to steal a woman had instead been stolen himself, stolen by love, by conscience, by the chance to become someone better than he'd been. And the woman he'd been paid to capture had captured his heart instead, holding it safe and cherishing it and making it grow into something he'd never known it could be. It was the kind of story people would tell for generations, around fires and on porches, in both English and Comanche. The story of how two people from different worlds chose to build a bridge instead of a wall, how they chose love over fear, and how that choice rippled out to change not just their lives, but the lives of everyone around them. It was a true Western tale, in every sense. Hard and beautiful and honest and hopeful all at once. And like all the best stories, it ended not with an ending, but with a beginning, with two people standing together at the threshold of their lives, ready to walk forward into whatever came next. Together. Always together.
Thanks for watching this story till the end. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And before you go, check out these other amazing Western stories waiting for you next. Subscribe, like, and I'll see you on the next ride.